Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first podcast of the BEST Virtual Summit. In the coming 45 minutes, we will talk about educational involvement in BEST, but also besides BEST, and about the impact that we can have on our stakeholders. I am Fleur, your host for tonight, and with me I have some special guests. They all had a role or will have a role to play in the coordination of the Educational Involvement Department of BEST. So let's ask them how they're doing. Guests, how you're feeling tonight? You can unmute yourselves.
Very
Good, very good. Thanks for having us.
Excited.
Awesome. Yay. That sounds good. Thank you all. So I have my first question ready. It's burning on my lips, and that's who are you, and what did you do to become involved in educational involvement in BEST, or maybe even without broader than BEST. So we will answer this question in chronological order. So let's start with the one who has the most life experience here, and that's João. So go ahead, João, and tell us who you are.
Hi, thanks for the diplomatic way of putting the fact that I'm the oldest here. So my name is João Rey. Since in BEST there's so many Joaos, then back in my days people would call me Ray. And I've been in BEST, or I was in BEST a long time ago. And one of the reasons why I decided to join was that at the time, the university that I was studying in didn't have a BEST group. And we were very jealous of the university next door that had a BEST group. And they could travel to all these amazing events. So we got together with a group of friends in Almada, and we decided to start our BEST group back then in 2002, 2003. So back then, the reason to do that was we really wanted to explore Europe and connect with other European students. And already back then, I was a little bit involved with the educational committees in the university and kind of shaping the education there. And when I heard that BEST had this international side of it, which was back then it was a committee, international involvement on educational matters, then I was really fascinated by it. And I was like, wow, these guys are really taking a stance on certain topics and certain issues. The big discussion back then was the Bologna process, which for you is ancient history. But back then it was a very hard fought for discussion, and a lot of position papers were being put forward, a lot of discussion between students and administration of universities, harmonization of education throughout Europe. So we were quite involved back then already with CEFI, with thematic networks, trying to give students point of view of how their education works. Then I was kind of lucky to have in my year a bit of a transition year where most of the members at our summer meeting for our BEST educational involvement were fresh. So we just took a look at the old archives from the 90s of BEST educational involvement, and we were in absolute awe of what these guys were writing, the ambition, taking certain positions. And we were very inspired by what for me, what these old dudes were doing. So we took that as a sort of a rallying cry for the team to achieve the same in that year. So so that was kind of like the beginning was really just trying to shape a little bit more the educational side of what BEST was doing at the time. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you so much. It's really inspiring to hear this. And it's also very inspiring to hear that even you were already looking at the past and then like learning from it. I think we can certainly do the same and let this podcast be again the start of looking into a little bit of history of educational involvement. So next we go to Marta, who was educational involvement coordinator from 2015 to 2016. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marta Cortesão. I'm from Porto, from Portugal. So my start in educational involvement in BEST really started as most of us. We are, as students, we kind of wish that some things are different and we have our own ideas on how it could be better. Not only our classes, but even our study program. Many of us kind of have to when we can go pick the subject so that we make our own path. And as soon as I found out that BEST was actually involved in this in a really, really well thought way, then I knew I had to be part of it. And what mostly surprised me was that it's not only a bunch of students trying to make a change, it's actually working. And it's working in a very scientific approach. And I mean, I'm a scientist, so it was super cool for me to see that this was being done in a really good way, where we can actually get the students' opinions and actually gather all the data and put it into scientific papers and show it into conferences. So for me, that was super attractive. And knowing that we can actually make a change with that, yeah, so for me, that was the main reason why I joined. And in that time, we were kind of ending all these thematic networks projects. So there were not so many international projects being financed by the European Commission anymore. So ProVip was one of the last ones, talking about virtual internships. And BEST kind of had to think about new ways of promoting ourselves, of finding new partners, of maybe getting into new projects. And yeah, so writing papers and going to conferences was a big part of this promotion that we had to do for our educational involvement. Not only within BEST, but for outside, so that people get to know us, so that we can get into new projects. Yeah, and the main concern was also this employability and all the students, not only for us to promote ourselves, but the whole concern on education was mainly on students getting employed.
I think this will become relevant again in this period of time. We will talk about it further in the rest of the podcast for sure, about like the situation, the whole reason why we have the summit, namely COVID-19. But let's not focus on that right now, and let's go to the next one in row, which is Dragana from the year after Marta, I think, and that's 2016, 2017.
Okay, thank you. And thank you guys for this amazing initiative. So my name is Dragana Manasova. I was a member of the local BEST group in Skopje. And as I was introduced, I was coordinating the department in 2016, 2017. So when going to university, I was, of course, we experienced kind of this transition going from high school and having these big expectations. And then we come to university and we see that maybe the lectures are overfilled and maybe we're not getting this individualistic approach from professors. So I started getting really interested in education and listening to some speakers, what they were saying, how education should change. So, and then just by accident, I ended up in a BEST meeting, and it was exactly an international rally when they were talking about the training system of BEST and the educational involvement. And then I thought, okay, like this sounds very cool. And it's something that I would really love to join and find out what they do. So then I suppose the rest is history. I started taking tasks, and I remember there was this kind of very cool mentoring system that was called Kittens and Angels and Embryos. And then by the time that I got to be very active in the department, there was also the transition in BEST happening. We were moving away from committees that had this very hierarchical kind of way of functioning to something that was supposed to be flatter, and so that people would engage more easily to in the departments and in the work. So a lot of the things that we did that year was focused on that, and also what Martina talked about, the transition with there was a transition in how Erasmus Plus funds were operating. So we were not getting as many grants. So we were trying also to accommodate, to kind of change the projects we do in order to reach more students.
Nice. I find it striking that you also talk about all these nicknames that we are inventing in BEST. I can assure you it still happens, so no worries about that. And about BEST, how it is now, we can move to the first educational involvement coordinator that I personally met in my own BEST career, which is the second João of tonight, but the most of us know him as Moita. So let's hear it for Moita, educational involvement coordinator of 2018 till 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And you can go.
Yep. Thank you very much. Yeah, as João already mentioned, in an international environment, I have to be called my last name because other people outside of from Portugal don't know how to pronounce João, but that's no problem. So how I got involved, I'm also from Portugal. I joined the Best Lisbon, and for my first year in Best, I was not involved in anything international, but I already had this interest about education and how the education system is structured. Um, so when I got to know this very special department, I started attending some online meetings that were open for everyone, and I didn't know, had no clue what was going on there. Actually, Dragana was there in my first meeting. Um, but yeah, I started learning more of what Best was doing regarding this, and then I understood how important this work actually is. And basically, I fell in love with it and decided that I wanted to dedicate a bit of my time and my work in Best for this cause. Um, and yeah, when I joined, there were some things going on. There were some ideas developing from years before, namely the creation of an advisory board, which actually João is now part of. So actually my first project was related to that. I had to contact with a lot of former international presidents, coordinators of the Educational Involvement Committee and so on, to understand better how we could structure this, to have external people. And now we have very relevant people in this advisory board that sometimes provide their input for our activities. And there was also one very interesting topic going on at the time, which was the position paper that John already mentioned. We had a position paper about the Bologna process a lot of years ago. I don't remember exactly which year. But then this concept came back to life, and there was a project of structuring how we can actually do proper position papers with proper background that we can actually state what's the opinion of students about a specific topic. And yeah, throughout my mandate, we worked on having a more, okay, we didn't get into the specific work that we are doing, but we tried to connect surveys with the live events that we have and that we used to have back then, but we tried to put it in a more structured way so that by the end we can have a more clear view of what's the opinion of one specific topic. And yeah, I was lucky enough to see this process until the end, until we are going to publish hopefully our first position paper in the near future. I mean, second.
Cool. Cool, nice. I really find it interesting that we are doing all these surveys, and to our listeners, you will be able to participate in a survey, not for a position paper, but at least for us to gain insight in some things that are happening during this pandemic in your universities. So that's for later on, but first let's go to our last one in row, and that's the future of educational involvement in BEST. That's Daniel, or Dani for short, who will be coordinating the upcoming year. So let's introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, I'm Daniel Garcia from LPG Madrid Carlos III, or Carliño as we are commonly known in international environment of BEST. I basically started my journey in education involvement since I started university. I basically joined the university. I was super excited about, okay, I'm gonna learn a lot of good things about mathematics, engineering, and so on. But then actually I felt a bit disengaged because, like, as you probably felt the same, like you are more like a number in your university than actually like a person that people, take care of you and so on. I tried to start changing things and I joined the student representatives somehow with some committees, but I found out I was not going to change anything from there. So I was, let's say, feeling a bit sad when I found these guys from BEST, which they do like a lot of competition and courses. They also have actually events where they tackle education and they try to like solve or like talk about problems that the whole Europe has seen in the field of education. And then is when I went to my first BSc in, or Best Symposium Education in Krakow, where actually when I met Moita. And it was like basically I kind of fell in love with the organization, not only because they were like tackling something that I think it was really, really important, but also about the environment. Like in the end, it's just a course like 10 days with a lot of people from each of the countries, and you bond a lot with them. It was super interesting. Then someone told me there, okay, actually, we are gonna do the same event, but it's gonna be in our own university, and we're gonna tackle the problems of the university, of my University of Madrid. And this is when it got super interesting. I loved the project. I joined the LBG, and I became member of the LBG Madrid Carlos III. And then I started. Actually, I got like elected to what we call investment organizer, and it was a super interesting journey when I could like talk to professors, talk to students, and actually deliver some of the outcomes to the management of the university. So it was a very empowering cycle, because in just like, let's say 6 months, I passed from thinking that I would not be able to make any change to actually do something that could actually change the university. And from then on, I just started getting into international field. I got to know educational involvement department, started to get more projects in there, and here I am, like recently, like people voted for me to be the next study coordinator, which is super exciting, because as everyone, like all my colleagues said, we actually can make an impact, and we will strive for that.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how you kind of all know each other and you're united in this one mission. Also, the thing that Daniel said about empowering yourself and others, that will for sure be heard further on in this podcast even more. But now that our listeners kind of know all of you a little bit, I want to ask them a question. So if you're following this podcast from YouTube, then you can answer the following question in a poll that should be in the chat by now. And it's about, have you ever been involved in the betterment of your own or someone else's education? So I want to know, have you ever been involved in educational involvement? So that's the question that I will want to ask to all of our listeners today. If you're listening afterwards, unfortunately, we won't be able to take your full answer into account, but we will first hear some more of the next question that I have for our guests, and then we will return back to your answers. Okay. So I hope it's not too laggy, because with me it's lagging a little bit at the moment.
It's all good.
Okay. So the next question I want to ask to our guests is, you all explained your path of how you became coordinator, or what was happening around you at the time. But can you tell us the impact that this path had on your life and on the life of those around you? Because it's not only about you, it's about all the others that you are in dialogue with. So I'm very curious to hear some inspirational stories of what you did and what it can mean for our listeners. So feel free to answer. You don't have to follow the same order anymore. We can just go one by one. So Moita, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like when we talk about educational involvement in BEST, there are mainly two things that we are focused on. One is increasing, actually, let's start with the other one. It's to gather students' input about educational matters, and then try to share this opinion to relevant stakeholders like universities, international organizations, and so on. And the second part is to increase students' awareness and involvement in educational matters. And this part is a very important one for me. The making students think of these topics, making students give their opinion and waste time, let's say, to do something to improve their education is a super valuable thing. And sometimes we think that no one cares about our opinion as individuals, but there are a lot of people that do. And if people are aware that they have this power and that they can change things, it's super empowering. A very interesting story that I felt very happy about. A particular one is that when I met Danny, he was interested in these topics, and we were discussing a lot of, specific topics of education. But I think that in that event, he understood that he could actually have an impact, as he already said. And then seeing some months after, seeing the outcomes and some recordings from his local event on education, made me feel really happy to see that just by making other students worry about these things and taking action, we can have an impact in places that we never thought we would reach otherwise. So yeah, that's my inspiring story, let's say.
Nice. Maybe we can now hear the other story first from Danny's side, because we just heard like one side of the story. I really want to hear the other side as well. So how was your experience of that?
Yeah, definitely. I think Moita like totally interpreted like beautiful words. Thank you, Moita. I also have a lot of appreciation for you. Actually, I met Moita like in 3 PSCs. The first was Krakow, and then we changed, let's say, the roles. And during this summer, both in Skopje, and also met him in Aveiro. I was like facilitator while he was some sort of participant, and it was really interesting because like in only 1 year happened, and actually many things changed from that on. And definitely, for me, that event was a inflection point that I think is said that way, where you can actually understand that if you want and if you have like the right people around you, you can make a change, or at least you can try to do it. But it usually happens for all of us that if we're alone and maybe we don't have a lot of knowledge, it's very easy to feel, okay, there's nothing I could do about this.
Yeah. Cool. I also see that Marta might have a question or a reply to that. I'm sure she has some wonderful insights as well and great stories to share from a little more backward.
Yeah, I mean, I have one cool story. At least for me, it was very impactful. It was like this confirmation that what we do is actually mattering, and that what we do is actually helping not only students, but the professors and the universities to actually also make a change. I was at a conference, an international conference. I think it was not in Portugal, it was somewhere else. But the rector of the university, of my university from Porto, was also there. And after some 2 days of sessions, he looks at me and says, you know, Marta, if there would be more bests in the world, the education in Europe would be way better. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for what BEST does. And I was like, oh my God, the rector of my university is actually acknowledging that BEST is important. And yeah, I mean, you do feel like you can actually make a change. Of course, as Danny said, when you're alone, you don't feel this. But when you are in a group of people motivated enough that can share their knowledge and actually works for it, then you can totally make a change.
Nice. Dragana, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would connect to what Moita was saying about the engagement and engagement of students. And I would say that that was the most important aspect for me as well, because it was kind of like surpassing this hierarchy of saying like, okay, we're just the students, we're the passive kind of acceptors of this educational procedures that are created by professors, but rather we can have an opinion and say, okay, we think that something can be better, and we can take an action to make a subject, a program, or a whole process improved. And what was very surprising, and I was very happy to find it when starting to be internationally involved in EduID, was that professors in conferences were actually open to hear the students' opinion. And there were professors that actually cared and were enthusiastic to kind of initiate changes in education.
Okay, cool. Moita has something direct to apply.
Yes, just to add to that, one personal experience that I had also in a conference, that some professor said, yeah, sometimes we find ourselves in these conferences just talking between professors, like what the students think about this and why don't we just bring the students here? And that's a very important thing, like bringing the students to the discussion and trying to understand their points of view. Of course, education is not supposed to be as only as students want, but that could be a bit end up in just, I don't know, parties and not learning about learning. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's important to hear all the points of view and bring all the stakeholders to the discussion.
Yeah, I really think that this educational involvement, it should be a dialogue. And I feel that Joao has probably more to add to that.
Which Joao? Me.
Yeah, you. I will refer to the other one as Moita.
As Moita. All right. So just to add to what Joao was saying. So in my time in BEST, during my time as coordinator and also afterwards, we attended a lot of conferences. And even when we weren't on the stage presenting something, I always made a point of standing up and asking a question. And it was fascinating to see that when you do that, then the audience listens, because you're usually the only student, or you're only the few students there. Everyone is from different organizations and a lot of professors, obviously. But when you raise your voice, when you raise your hand to ask a question, they actually were engaged and trying to listen to what the students had to say and what the students had to ask. And that was also a very good way for us to then next year to get invited onto the panel. So you first start by asking questions, and then next year they invite you to the panel, and then next year you start giving out more direct opinions. So it was very good to see that happening back then. So clearly, don't lose faith in the fact that your voices are heard and that you can have an impact on shaping the future of education. On the other hand, there was also a very famous joke that we would tell around in some of the educational conferences, which is, to change an institution is very hard. It's a little bit like shifting a graveyard. You shouldn't count with a lot of help from the inside. It usually needs to be someone from the outside pushing for that, and that was kind of like the role that students had. But Fleur, just to answer your question on the impact that BEST had on my life for being coordinating the educational involvement, I think it's kind of hard to it's a bit of a understatement, but BEST really did change my life, because I'm living in Estonia for the past 13 years, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for BEST. BEST opened up Europe to me and made me feel like Europe was my sort of home country, in a way that back then traveling was already available, but it wasn't so much of a thing. And now I feel comfortable being where I am, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for BEST. The other good thing was that being the coordinator of the educational side also gave me the first, some of the first taste of this sort of leadership position, working in a virtual environment, which are things that I still use to this day. The tools that the training involvement, the training committee had back then, I use the same materials on some of the stuff that I do now. What we're using now to coordinate this, the finger rules. In some of the events that I organize some hackathons. Randomly I met some person who was using finger rules. She had Post-its with finger rules on it, and I was like, "Who are you? Where do you come from? How do you know these rules?" And she wasn't from BEST, but she was also using it based on the training material. So there's a lot of stuff that you learn in BEST that I guarantee you will use throughout your career, and that really just tells you the power of the student organization that we have built, and the testament to the future generations that are going through it. Yeah.
Nice. Wow. I'm really just awed by all your experiences. I can relate to a lot as well. I can and I really feel inspired, and I want to stand up in that crowd and raise my finger and say like, hey, no, I don't agree with that, or yes, I agree, please do it more, something like that. I really think that that's the very powerful. And as I've seen from our listeners, we have 16 responses. So thank you all for responding to the poll. And I see that 88% of you that are listening now at the moment, they actually were involved already in some kind of educational matters that helped shape their education. So really good that you're all doing that, and keep on doing it. Maybe one day you will inspire some other people without you even knowing it. So that's really interesting. And this actually all leads me to another question to my guests, and that is, what is your vision actually on educational involvement in general, and how can our listeners really contribute? We already touched it briefly, like saying you can just stand up in a crowd when you're attending a conference and raise your question. But maybe there are other small things that they can do. What should our listeners pay attention to regarding to the future? So yeah, just let the question sink in, and I will take fingers, as Joao also already said that we're doing here. So yeah, I'm not sure which one is latest. I think Dragana is first, or was it from before? Or...
Yeah, it was from before. I went to two. But I think Moita wants to start maybe this one.
Okay, yeah. Then we start with Moita again.
Yeah, I didn't want to be the first one again, but well, here I am. So yeah, what I was going to say, one of the most important ways in which our listeners can engage and every student can engage is by not ignoring what is going on. So a lot of times you see a survey or an event or a conference that is about some topic of education, and you see like, oh, interesting, and just move on with your life. Engage and do things, reply to surveys, send your questions. There are like these international initiatives today. For example, we heard about the UNESCO Futures of Education. They are open to listening to people. You can just go there and leave your opinions, and these opinions will be taken into account. Of course, it's not just like they are only listening to you, they are listening to a lot of people. But by doing that, by engaging and by participating in these activities, you can also take a part in this. And then by the thing that I was mentioning before, that our goal as educational involvement in particular, is also to increase the students' awareness. So you can also increase other people's engagement and awareness about these topics. So yeah.
Nice. Marta, you had like a reply to this?
Yeah, I just want to say it again, that the European Commission really has a lot of active surveys and polls for the whole population, so all the citizens can actually answer with their own opinions, not only about education, but other things. And also, usually there's a lot of citizen debates on different topics. So if you are a little bit motivated to actually do something about it, you can go to these debates, you can go to, or you can fill on these surveys. So also the best surveys, if you find some in your local university, you can also do it. Or if you have your best group in your university, you can also just go there and say, hey, I have this idea, maybe we should contact some students or the professors, and then you can do your own event where you gather your students' opinions. So yeah, just go for it. If you are motivated and if you feel something can be improved, then you can totally go for it. You will have people that will help you.
Talking about surveys, we will launch one right now already. Normally it was for after this question, but you're already hyping the listeners so much for filling in surveys that I cannot ignore this. So if you go onto the YouTube live stream, you will find the link shortly to a form, which we will probably not now, but in the future, we will assess it and we will send you back the results so that you can also see that. It's about how your university has adapted to the COVID-19 situation and how you felt as a student with those changes. So make sure to check it out and fill it in. And then I think that Dragana also had something to add to the question, what's your vision for educational involvement and how can our listeners contribute?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect a bit because what brought things that brought to me new knowledge and best was when I started exploring different countries and meeting people from different countries, and then only came to realizations of, okay, what is maybe wrong in my educational system and what can be better, in a sense that, okay, I see like in Portugal if they're applying something differently, or in Germany, and then maybe I can take this initiative back to my professors. So I think that's kind of like extending of our borders, extending of our knowledge really contributed not only to me, but for example, what I would do when I was teaching bachelor students in the first year in a subject, or the conversations that I would have with professors. So kind of this reflects my idea that change can come from the smallest initiatives, and just by engaging with the professors that are actually teaching you, because sometimes themselves they might not be realizing how something can be better and something can be different.
Nice. I really like that you say that it can all start from the small things. I also firmly believe that, and maybe Joao has to add something. You.
Yeah, so my perspective may be slightly different, because I've been away from BEST for a while, and a little bit less connected with students nowadays. But I don't know, if the audience is very much student centric, then it might be a bit different. But what I would like to add is the fact that even if you are beyond your studies, you can still shape education. If you're a recent graduate and you know how it was like for you, you can shape education. So a lot of the things that I do now have to do with entrepreneurship and startups and people starting their own companies. And we've seen in the recent pandemic the need for new tools, the need for new ways of teaching. And I think this is an open space for a lot of innovation to happen when it comes to shaping education. The role of universities is also changing constantly, and I think this crisis is yet another challenge to the role of universities, if they're just there to stamp out diplomas or whether they're there to transfer knowledge, and how that happens nowadays. So I think there's a lot of role for people to play in shaping their education through starting their own companies that have to do with educational involvement. There is a lot of money that is going out there to fund startups to deal with tackling issues related with education. So this is my invitation to the audience also to think about it, not just in shaping your education, but starting a company that would shape education for others. Yeah.
Okay, Dragana still has something to add here.
Yeah, I very much agree with this. And just one argument that was usually said by both students and professors is that changes in education are very, very slow. But now with this situation, we see that actually that is not true, and that they can accommodate, for both professors and institutions can accommodate very well to a fast changing situation.
Nice. So then related to this, I will go to a next question. We will hear more about the COVID-19 situation. I actually want to ask you another question related to that. How do you think that BEST can redirect this crisis, let's say, into a vision for the future? It's a bit of a difficult question. It's normally I was going to end with this one, but since you already brought the crisis up, so I want to know, how do you feel COVID affected educational involvement in BEST, and how do you think that BEST actually can redirect this crisis into a vision more for the future? And just a reminder to our listeners, fill in the survey. Okay, cool. And then I will take new fingers. Yeah, Joao. Oh, wait, you're muted still.
Sorry about that. So I think the crisis has definitely pushed a lot of old farts in education to realize that things can happen faster than they realize, right? A lot of adoption of new technologies was forced down on old companies and old institutions way quicker than they realized could be done. So that's definitely an opportunity. So what can BEST do there, and what role can BEST have? So on the one hand, I think besties, as we call them, are in a very good position to tackle the marketplace once they come out of this crisis, because they working virtually is not new to us. All the working methods, international teams, working online, different time zones, managing projects online. This is not new to us. It wasn't new when I started, and it's definitely not new now. So we're in a very good position to tackle that once we get to the marketplace. The other thing that I want to say is that, maybe just to be a little bit critical of BEST, as alumni need to be sometimes.
Sure.
I think BEST probably missed out a little bit on the wave of entrepreneurship that was sweeping through Europe, and I think the concept that we had for competitions could have been modeled very quickly into startup fairs or startup competition fairs, and I think we might have missed that. It's not too late, because I think COVID gives us a good opportunity to jump back into that. And I think this is also where, if you look at the outcomes of the crisis, student unemployment has been a thing, and I think it's going to continue to be a thing. So empowering students with skills that are relevant is very, very important. Giving them the tools to then start their own businesses and then employ others, I think is going to be crucial. How much is that connected with educational involvement? I think it's absolutely crucial that we teach students about those things that go beyond the hard skills and are more connected with the soft skills needed to start your own business. So this is kind of like my message to BEST, to focus energy on continuing to prepare students to come out of this crisis.
Yeah, that's really a strong message. And I think I strongly believe we should go to the next coordinator in line and see his vision about like all the information he got at the moment, like how will he transfer it to lead this cool department inside of BEST that's able to innovate in educational involvement. So Daniel, up to you.
All right, so well, definitely I agree with, I guess, everything you have said before, and actually Joao has a very interesting point. We need to prepare like students, like maybe not in the field of education involvement, but in this complementary education, we need to prepare like students, because in the end, like they will need a lot of skills that right now in the university they are not being taught. But coming back to education involvement, I think we have now a very good position. I mean, we have seen now that because of the crisis, all the universities have moved to this online learning, online assessment, like in a matter of weeks. They said it was not possible, and now they had to do it because they didn't have any other option. The thing here is we have, let's say, a little advantage. We are born with, let's say, phones. We know internet. We know like it's in everyday life, as opposed to maybe our like oldest professors. But they need to change. And if they need to change to a model that is digital, they will need our input, because we are the ones that we have it like every day, and we, let's say, are some sort of used to that. So I think that could be a good opportunity for students, for young people, but especially for BEST, to try to fill that gap and be there when professors, universities are thinking how to change education and actually how to put a model that works. Not just improvising, but actually putting something that works. We should be there to give input and makes the voice of the students be heard.
Nice. With that powerful message, I will conclude this podcast. We're now at 45 minutes exact. So let me wrap up this great podcast by telling you, all listeners, I really want you to reflect how can you be the change? How can you make sure that you're changing your education? How can you help your professors, help your universities to overcome this crisis, help BEST overcome this crisis, and just think about it, how you can do it, fill in the survey, you can state your vision there as well. And to end, I would like to thank all my guests here, because it was really a very, very enjoyable session and I learned so much. I wish I could keep you talking for hours and hours, because it's so inspirational. But we sadly have to wrap up now, and I would suggest that we all wave goodbye to our listeners. So bye.